In this tutorial, we're going to cover how to import weapons into the Action RPG inventory system, but more specifically into the Unreal Engine. So if you look here in the Weapons Meshes folder, you see that we have skeletal meshes and static meshes. The skeletal mesh is what the character equips, and the static mesh is the representation of the mesh that gets dropped into the world. So it'll have a different rotation. You can see here that it's laying on the ground as opposed to standing up like the skeletal mesh. Let's go ahead and open the skeletal mesh. As you can see that the root bone axis here is aligned with the game axis, so you have the blue up, green forward, and red X towards you. Weapons themselves will be oriented left to right here, facing Y forward, and if you look at melee weapons, they'll actually be standing upwards, facing along the positive Y, the green axis here. And I'll show you in just a moment the need for that. So if we go ahead and we look at the character skeleton, we can see that we have two separate attach points, main hand and offhand for weapons. And if we add a preview asset here, we'll add the assault rifle and the axe. You can see why they need to be oriented that way that we were just demonstrating. So let's go ahead and add the assault rifle. Okay, you can see now that they both sit in the hand depending on the way they were exported. If you're seeing any other rotations than what you're seeing here with melee weapons or guns, then it's an issue with how you exported your art. So if we go back to the weapons folder here and look at the shield, you'll also want the shield to be positioned similar to the melee weapons so that they rest properly equipped to the player's hand. Now let's take a look at the Infinity Blades folder here and look at some weapons that we can bring into our project. So let's go ahead with the staff here, static mesh. So we're going to use the staff because the staff only has a static mesh, where some of the other Infinity Blade assets already have a skeletal mesh set up, so that'll make it easier for you. So if you only have a static mesh, we'll show you how to do it. So we're going to just quickly export it out here so that we can bring it into our art software. So let's just go ahead and import the static mesh. So one thing to note is that by default, Maya has a different coordinate layout than Unreal does. By default, Maya has Y up and the Z is forward. So to make it easier, you can go into Maya and you can switch it to be Z up. But another difference too is that when you have Z up in Maya, the negative Y in Maya is the positive Y in Unreal. That's why you might notice that the green Y is facing backwards here, but this is the rotation that we want for art. So let's go ahead and just rename it here. Okay, another thing to note is you see here on the grid is basically 0, 0, 0 in the coordinate system. That's very important in Unreal. So what we want to do is let's move this staff down to where we want to hold it with our hand. So we'll use the 0, 0, 0 as the base point, grab point. Okay, so now that we have it in the right position, let's go ahead and just move the pivot point here right into the middle. Just double check that it's in the right spot. Okay, so now we've updated our static mesh. You can see that we've made changes to it, so we're going to have to go ahead and freeze these transformations. You want to make sure that before you do anything for exporting that you've zeroed out your transforms. Let's export this static mesh because we're going to use it a bit later. And now we'll move on to building the skeletal mesh. So what we'll want to do is add a bone. Let's call it root. And we'll move that to 0, 0, 0. Okay, now in Maya, when you go to select, it's going to select the root. We want to freeze transforms, delete all by type history, We'll go ahead and delete history again just to make sure there's no extra data there. And then we want to bind skin. Just to clarify, you want to select the root first and then select the mesh before you bind. So we'll do that again here. Bind skin. So now you can see that all the axes are locked because we've bound the mesh to the bone. Okay, now one last time we can go through and we can delete non-deformer history. If you delete history while you've got a mesh skin to a bone, it's going to mess everything up. But if you make any changes or move things, you need to delete non-deformer history. So now we can go ahead and save the skeletal weapon staff here. We'll just go over some of the settings you want. So you want to make sure that smooth groups is on. You can have animation on or not, it doesn't really matter. You'll want it on obviously if you're working with animations. You can turn off export cameras and lights. The axis conversion, you can leave up axis Y because we've already corrected it with the setup. And you want FBX 2014-2015. Okay, now that it's exported, let's go back into Unreal. And we're going to move over the material and the textures here, just so we have something to apply to our new mesh. I'm just going to copy them so we're not moving anything from the project, so we still have the original there. Okay, I'll just quickly rename them. Go through and point these to the new textures. Okay, so we want our new name textures. Update the emissive. And lastly, the normal map. Okay, perfect. So now we can go ahead and we can import in the meshes. So let's bring in the skeletal mesh. And now we want to leave the import materials and textures unchecked because we have those already. Also with the skeleton, you can share skeletons, but just to keep things simple, we're just going to let it generate its own here. So now you can see we have the skeleton mesh, we have a physics asset, and then the skeleton for it. So you can see that there's been a texture applied. Also that if you look at the axis here, we have the blue up, the green forward, and the red towards us, matching what you see in the bottom left corner. That's very important. If you import it in and those don't match, you need to re-export it. Let's just quickly update this physics asset here. It's not always going to do the best job, so you might have to make some tweaks, but definitely worth checking that out. Okay, and we'll point this to the material that we just created, so that we're not referencing things from the other folder. Okay, next we're going to bring in the static mesh. But first we need to update it so it's on its side, so that when we drop it, it lays down on the ground. So let's bring back in that static mesh from earlier that we were working with. And we're just going to rotate it. Okay, we want to make sure we rotate it to -y because that's forward in Unreal. So we'll just go ahead and give that a 90. Okay, another thing too is, again, that 0, 0, 0 coordinate is very important. So if we were to drop this asset in the world now, it would actually be halfway through the ground. So let's just bring it up a bit, so we can kind of give it a little bit of an offset from where it'll sit. Okay, so let's go ahead and freeze transformations. So we zeroed all our values and we can export the static mesh. Okay, so now let's bring in the static mesh we just exported. Okay, you can see it's aligned with the same as the other ones. Let's go ahead and assign the material back to it. We'll just adjust the collision volume a little bit. Okay, looks good. Now you can see when we drop it on the world, it sits there. So you might want to tweak it a little bit when you're exporting. It also has to do a bit with the collision volume we just created for it. And then you see here the one that we are going to attach to the player's hand. So they're different rotations. Okay, so let's delete these. Let's go ahead and create a new item so we can test the staff. We'll just call it Weapon Staff Ancients. We'll give it a null icon because we haven't created an icon for it yet. And we'll give it some properties here. We'll set it as droppable so we can throw it back into the world, and we'll select the world mesh. Okay, let's get the equipment mesh, the skeleton mesh here, and let's type weapon and main hand. And then we'll just give it some stats for fun. Okay, that's everything done. We've now brought in our own asset into the game. We've created a new item, so let's go ahead and create a blueprint prefab here. So we'll just duplicate this one and give it the same name, and we'll update the ID. But now you see here that the icon hasn't changed, but when we drag it in the world, it's the correct art. This is just an issue with the editor. So you can see in the viewport it's the right art, but we have to go in and manually set the static mesh to what we want the icon to show as. So we'll just select it here, compile and save, and you can see that the icon is updated. Okay, so let's go ahead and just give it a test. Okay, we'll pick up Staff of Ancients, we've got our null icon, let's equip it. Looks good, running around. Drop it on the ground, pick it up, drop it again, and that's it. That's all you have to do to bring in your own weapon art. It's very easy.